Um, so before we get started today, let's go over a few logistical items. This session is being recorded. Captions are available during this session by clicking on the live CC button at the bottom of your Zoom window. Thanks to April Amy for providing these. She's our live captioner today. Please use the Q&A feature for any presentation questions. You can choose to do this anonymously. There will be a 10 to 15 minute Q&A session at the end of the presentation today. Please use the chat for general comments or technical issues. My colleague Joanna Kimmett will be monitoring the chat for any questions and comments that you all may have or may be making. Joanna will also be adding some links into the chat. One is for collaborative resource sharing. If you think of a related reading, podcast, video, or something else, please share it with the COM Planning Committee so that we can post it to COM's Resources Otero. One of the volunteers will drop this information in the chat for you. The next link is our conference code of conduct. And now I will turn the session over to our presenters. And I'm sorry, my apologies. I read off the wrong, I believe I read off the wrong title. Did I? I think I did. No, I didn't. I got it right. So sorry about that. So I will hand it over to the presenters now.
All right, thanks, Shannon. You hit the right title because now I don't have to repeat it. So thanks for doing that. Welcome, everyone. We're going to talk about grant seeking practices today. This is an area that we've been working on and are still figuring out at our institution, but it's something we've had some success with. We're starting to get a lot of momentum, and we just wanted to share that with everyone and feel we can all learn and benefit together from that. I think at a high level, what we're going to argue today is that successful grant seeking really has to be pragmatic and also programmatic. It isn't just something that's ad hoc, but it's something that is connected to a larger strategy. So we're going to unpack that for you here. Who are we? All right, so we work together. Let me move some windows around here. Okay, we work together at Carnegie Mellon University Libraries. I'm Brian Mathews, Associate Dean, Research and Innovation. And in this regard, and in this context, I'm really interested in finding interesting questions and problems to explore how we can turn those insights into experiments and potentially new services or more questions and more problems to explore and build thematic programs. So the imagination, the curiosity, and that part of it all is what really intrigues me. I'll hand things over to Joelle.
Hi, everybody. I'm Joelle Pitts. I'm the Senior Associate Dean at CMU, and my portfolio oversees our finances, our operations, and our HR aspects across the library, as well as many of our core services. And with this topic, I'm really interested in the infrastructure around grants and extramural funding and empowering our staff and faculty to go after and manage grants with confidence. Next slide, please. I'm going to go over kind of the game plan for today. This is an overview of what we'll be talking about. So we'll talk a little bit about the funding landscape that we're all in here in library land in the US. So why are we seeking grants and sponsored funding and how that really fits into in academic libraries. Then we'll take a look at grant seeking and grant management, sort of the thinking behind some of those, the philosophy piece, and also some very concrete elements that are really important to think about as you go after some of these sources of funding. And then we'll also touch a little bit on the culture. So the culture of grants and sponsored projects and how that can influence and impact our organization. So let's jump into funding landscapes. So as managers and leaders in your library organizations, you've undoubtedly encountered limitations, we'll say, in funding, and perhaps even had to grapple with some budget shortfalls in a landscape of frankly scarce resources. And if you have, you're not alone. Over the past several decades, academic libraries in the US and globally have experienced annually increasing costs and relatively flat or decreasing allocations. It's pretty rare these days that even large research universities can count on annual operational increases to match inflation. And library spending as a percentage of overall university spending has continued to decline as well, now averaging about 1% or less, at least among ARL libraries, and I would imagine even less at non-ARL libraries. Most academic libraries also function under some iteration of a historical budget model, where the amount that you get this fiscal year is based on not what you need or the activities that you're doing, but what you got last year. And even in activity-based or RCM budget models, the library is typically identified as a cost center, and therefore only allocated what is deemed kind of the bare minimum for operations, which they base on historical budget information. So for most academic libraries in the United States, their allocation is the biggest piece of the pie. Some combination of funds from your provost, from your central finance unit, that allocation funds the majority of what you're doing. Followed by some combination of endowments, gifts, tuition, revenue if you offer for-credit courses, and if you're very lucky, a defined cut of the central overhead that your institution receives from federal funding. Lots of libraries also pursue grants, but not typically as part or an integrated part of their overall financial structure or picture. And when they do get them, it's great, but they are routinely forecasted and you can't really count on them when you're creating budgets year to year. In many cases, I think across the board, that central allocation that we've traditionally used to fund the vast majority of our salaries and our materials and other operational activity is stagnating or shrinking. And library deans kind of across the board are increasingly expected to fundraise and encourage greater sponsored project activity to make up for that shortfall. And what some large research libraries are doing, and what we're kind of attempting to do here at CMU, is transition our extramural and grant activity from a kind of a nice to get or an ad hoc activity to an intentional and structural part of our annual funding landscape. And the rest of our talk today is really going to center on what we're doing to achieve that along the entire funding life cycle. So I'm going to turn this back over to Brian to kick off with a focus on grant seeking.
Thanks. So, one of the most challenging things about grant seeking or sponsored projects, or even just building external partners, is this wide range of possibilities. In libraries, we often hear about IMLS or Mellon Foundation, or maybe some agencies like NSF, NIH. But when you look across it, you step back and really look at it, it's this expansive landscape, and it's overwhelming because of the size and the volume, and often the quick turnaround times, and just the amount of effort that it takes to apply for funding. But on the positive side, there are all these agencies or entities or groups that are looking to fund projects. And so you have that at a federal or state level, you have that with industry partners or nonprofits, you have that across, our own universities or colleges, and sometimes even some internal options within the library itself. So let's explore this range a little bit. I think if your team or you personally or your library or whatever you're kind of working with in this space, one of the things that we suggest is adopting this idea of like grant literacy or grant seeking literacy, and treating it like a literacy, and personally, what I've found, helpful is to pick a handful of organizations. There's a few here that I tend to follow, and watch them for 3, 6, 12 months, get to know their funding cycles, get to, is it, annual, is it biannual, is it quarterly, is it random, seemingly random? What are they looking for? Are they focused on digital preservation? Are they focused on emerging technologies? Are they focused on professional development? What is it that they're kind of looking for? Get to know the requirements, look at who they're funding, and generally just how they communicate on that. And there's a ton of information on that. Like at our conferences and other conferences, a lot of the different funders will generally give presentations on their priorities and their trends. A lot of these are freely available online or on their website. C&I does a great job of doing that once a year, bringing together different folks to talk about, what's on their minds and where things are heading. And again, a lot of the agencies themselves or foundations or just entities themselves will provide information. Like here's one online through YouTube that IMLS is doing now, and I think it's closed. But they also have a number of other grants that are available too. So there's a lot of information that's communicated to us, that's available to us. So I think being able to watch that for opportunities for you, but also just to get a sense of again this sense of literacy. IMLS, sticking with that, it's good to spend time understanding the process before you're facing an impossible deadline. Before you're trying to like gather all this information and write everything, getting that sense of like, what would it take to apply to a grant? What information do you have or don't you have? And we'll get into that a little bit more, but getting a sense of the timelines, the requirements, the supporting documentation that's required, and all that kind of stuff. How does this align with your mission, and so on. So I wanted to just spotlight a few. I think we had someone from Mississippi here with us today, but this is like at a federal agency, federal level. Here's these are the types of things around like a training and just a large medical data access here. Here's one that's a little closer to home for us at Carnegie Mellon, where we were working with a foundation with Sloan to archive robotics and treating that as a scientific endeavor to document and archive the process there. Another one that's close to home for us is, at the city or regional or state level, is an example from Pennsylvania where we're investing money in open educational resources. So again, there's a lot of state education things that overlap with libraries as well. Here's an example at a university level where there's funds available for different initiatives. You probably encountered this, as well, but again, this is at Indiana. Again, and there's things that could be related to, new course development or different fellowships, international activities, or certain anniversaries and whatnot too. So there's funds available. And I wanted to share this one, lastly, because I think it's timely if you follow the higher ed news. But again, this is an example of internal grants that libraries kind of make available too, where sometimes we can carve out, small portions of money or even large portions of money and make that available for different initiatives sort of in-house as well and stimulate that as well. So there's this wide range of possibilities. And I think that's like one key piece of it is understanding, okay, there's these different people who want to give us money, if you will, or we can package that. I think the other part of this grant seeking literacy is understanding the types of funding or types of categories that are available, for that. Sometimes it's, to test an idea, to see, a seed project or seed funding or a pilot project. Sometimes it's capacity building related to training or investigating or doing field work or needs analysis, that kind of thing. Maybe there's projects or programs or centers that gets a little bit more sort of intensive with that, but there's also travel grants and equipment requests or equipment availabilities and residencies and awards and fellowships and scholarships. So there's a whole host of possibilities, with that. And it can be overwhelming, to kind of jump into that. But it's, again, thinking through this calculus, this connecting of the dots, where you have these funding agencies, you kind of have, their timelines and requirements that we're kind of working with. You have different types of funding categories, things that can be funded. You've got different financial amounts. Is this $2,000, $20,000, $2 million? There's a host. There's different amounts require different levels of paperwork. We'll say that. Timescales. Again, is this a semester? Is this a year? Is this 3 years? Do you have the skills and bandwidth and personnel? If not, are you able to include that in the grant to kind of seek that? Do you have the physical space, the virtual space, the equipment? I remember talking with Joelle about a place to store old robots. It's good to figure that out before you get the grant rather than after. So some advice there for you if you get in the robot business. I think another key piece of this is to think thematically. So instead of, this reacting or ad hoc kind of thing, this idea of building a program or a through line or a vision or even a mission, if you will. And I'm not going to read all these. These are here to just kind of spark some thoughts, spark some thinking. But maybe you have a team or a group or a committee or some type of desire, in your organization to do something different. Maybe you want to explore new literacies and combine that with active learning or pedagogies, or maybe you want to combine something like climate change and citizen science, or community archiving and underrepresented voices. Whatever that theme or that initiative or priority that's within your organization, you can build around that. And this is kind of we're talking about think thematically, but also think programmatically. And so, what we kind of have found helpful and in different cases is to kind of take that theme, whatever that is, and put it in the middle of a circle. And then you can kind of start to see what are these different layers or these different, I guess you can kind of say these different levels of engagement that can emerge from that. And from that, you can even take this into a spreadsheet and build kind of like a logic model or a program. When we were working on the robots, we called it our single point of truth. We had a lot of different people, probably 10, 12 people working on different aspects of that initiative. And we kind of needed a place to keep everything together in a shared place. So again, once you kind of take that theme and you figure out who are you partnering with, who are the different audiences, what expertise is involved here, what kind of events or activities, what kind of stories, advocacy, what's the land, figuring out all that. And it's an iterative thing, but figuring out all that, then you kind of start to match and pinpoint different funding opportunities or even just different partners and so forth. So thinking thematically, thinking programmatically, this is a type of tools you can have. Just two quick examples from Carnegie Mellon. We've invested for a number of years now in an open science program, and this isn't really grant heavy, but I'm just kind of showing this more from a programmatic building kind of thing, where we're able to kind of take a theme and then bring together tools and training and expertise and events and gatherings, collaborative partnerships, and it becomes a really well-defined thing. We've done this for over 6 years now, I think. And so it really starts to harmonize and build an identity and program around that we could probably go after funding for that if we wanted to. I think another example of this has been our open science program office, where we have gone after funding. And I'm not expecting you to read all these, I guess they're tweets. I'm not expecting you to read all this kind of information, but I think the gist of it is you can kind of see there's in one summer, we were able to get sort of a founding grant from Mellon, and I mean, not Mellon. I'm looking at Carnegie Mellon and Sloan. I was like, that didn't match up, but we were able to kind of launch an office. And then from that, a year later, we were able to get more funding to expand that, to build community with other universities. And then a few months later, being able to bring in some funds to student organized hackathons and kind of make that a little bit further. So it's, again, you kind of taking that theme, you're building out a sort of a program, and then matching that up with, who can we partner with, who can support us, go in with us, who can fund some things. So just a quick example. I think this is a question that we often talk about too, is like, what do funders want? A lot of times we think about it like, what do we want? What are we trying to get out of it? We're focused on our idea and our local issues, if you will. But, this is an application process, and you can go through their webinars and their websites, all the stuff, and you can kind of see what they're asking for. But ultimately it comes down to like, are you a good match for them? Can you help advance their mission? Is your idea going to have broad impact? Is it going to have reach? Is it going to have influence? Is it going to be important? And that's subjective, but is it going to be important? Is it unique? Is it a good story? And this is a big one too, like what assurances do they have that you can actually deliver on the thing? When we were working with Robot Archives, we mentioned hiring contractors or consultants, and they, the foundation really kind of pushed us to name names, like who are we going to really bring in, because they wanted kind of like a social proof. They wanted to see like, were we legit, were we serious, could we actually pull off this kind of wild idea? Who are we thinking about bringing in, and making it very concrete for them? So again, I think it's all about not just about having good ideas and not just filling out the forms properly, but having a convincing story and a convincing package of what you're kind of do. I just want to drop 5 quick ideas here that's sort of related to that, building that package, if you will, the kind of the art and science, or science and art of applying for grants. And a lot of this is things to figure out before. So like while you're working on that thematic and programmatic kind of work, being able to think through these questions, because as you're going after grants, you can copy and paste and mix and match and do some different things. So what I kind of want to do here is just kind of take a component, there's 5 of them, and then just kind of show there's the sort of like the logical side of it, and then maybe the more expressive side of that, if you will. So you want to be precise and structured and organized, but also creative and adventurous as well. So, you know, the first one is like having clear goals and objectives. Like, can I read your proposal and be totally removed from exactly, you know, your library, your institution, or even this theme, and understand like, what is it you're trying to accomplish? Can you be specific? But then also there's this aspect of, is it compelling? You know, is it something new? Is there something urgent? Is there something interesting and emotional? Like, you want to capture that too. The idea of planning, you know, is it logical? Is it feasible? Is it believable? You know, can you pull this off? But also, what is the journey that your organization is going to take them on? You know, what's this journey that you're going to, you know, follow, and this path and this impact, and what's the benefit of this? The budgets, I know Joelle will probably touch on this in just a minute, but again, how can you really be specific, really itemize? This is every grant that I think we've been on. This is a key thing. They really kind of want to get down to figuring this piece out. You know, and what's the and I think a part of that is like, what is the evidence you have that that this is going to really kind of have that impact? So when you think about the art of it as well, it's not just here's the budget and here's what we're going to do, but it's like emphasizing value, emphasizing efficiency, helping them see that this is sort of an investment in a cause or a mission or some kind of outcome is a big part of it. Evidence of the need. Again, like, is this something that's unique? What's the problem you're solving? What are you exploring? What's the data say? But then on the other side, what's the human element? You know, are there testimonies that you can provide, letters of recommendation, so to speak? You know, are there case studies? Are there ways to really, you know, personalize this opportunity? And then lastly, this sort of like what's next a little bit, like how will you evaluate the success of this? Are there metrics you're going to use when the money is gone? Like, what happens next? Is there some sort of sustainable path? Is there a phase 2? Does it get embedded into the operation? Do you need to seek more funds? You know, what is that? You know, being able to outline that and making it, you know, interesting for them in that respect, or, you know, but what's the benefit? What's the outcome? What's the transformation? What's the impact? You know, what's the news headline or the press release that you put out at the end of this? So something there to weave together, again, the sort of the art and the science, and building a sort of a persuasive pitch, themes, and programmatic approach. That's really what I'm trying to get across to you. So now I'm gonna hand things over to Joelle and grant management.
All right, thanks, Brian. So we're going to jump into the management piece now and take a deeper dive into some of the internal infrastructure, we'll call it, of sponsored project administration over the entire life cycle. And this is a space that I am in, where my staff work, and where we're plugged in at the campus level. So what I'll do is just share some of the things that I think are generalizable from our experience here that may help your navigation of this at your institutions. So I will start by saying that CMU has a particularly crazy sponsored project infrastructure. We're a heavy research institution, but we have a very complex machine here. But I think that a lot of institutions do. And so, you know, while we have PIs who kind of hold the subject matter expertise, who write the grants, convince the funders, you know, through that art and science combination that Brian talked about, there really is a significant journey after that point, you know, for various other not insignificant factors of submitting these grants, managing them once you get the funding, and complying with all of the various nuances of both federal and private funders. And I won't go into depth on each one of these bullets here on this slide. They could each be their own 45-minute presentation, I think. But if you've navigated this process before, if you never have, these can be extremely overwhelming. And I'm going to touch some more on some of these in a moment, but just as an overview, the compliance landscape is increasingly nuanced and complex. And that's just the start, I think, made more complex by the most recent federal mandates around data management and open access. Very recently, there's been a graduate student mentoring mandate that's come out for, I think, one agency at least. So that can be very difficult to navigate, even for us librarians who I think are pretty plugged into sort of the grant and research mandate space. Knowing which office to go to with questions. This can be complex in itself, especially if you have a kooky system like we do here at CMU, and especially if you're not working in this space every day. And even if you are, the volatility here can really be hard to keep on top of. The sponsored project administration market, at least for the staff who work in these areas, is extremely volatile right now. Reporting is required on all sponsored projects, both to the funder and to the university, but also likely by your business office, by your dean, your library administration. And, because they want to know that the time and effort that you're spending and the commitment that you're spending is worth the time and effort. And that time and effort to do all of this is in itself a major time commitment. And I see a very real lack of bandwidth, both on the PI side of things, so the folks who have these great ideas and who are reaching out to the funders, but also on the grant administration side to manage all of these different components in this very complex machine under some pretty immovable deadlines. So we're going to talk a little bit more about financials. This is my bread and butter, of course, being over library finances at CMU. And in my opinion, this is really a full-time role. If you want to integrate grants into your overall funding structure. In fact, we have an open position right now for a sponsored project accountant whose entire job will be to manage this infrastructure, the administration piece of both our sponsored projects and our gift accounts. And this is because the obvious budgetary considerations like salaries and percentage of effort are really just the tip of the iceberg, right? If you don't have the capacity internally to do the cool things that you're suggesting to these agencies that you want to be doing, you have to think about hiring consultants or subcontractors to do that work. And so, you have to have in-house considerations for your staff. And if you're going externally, you'll likely have to involve folks like HR and accounts payable, and navigating those structures can be their own fun experience. Things like labor laws and tax considerations, are something that we don't learn in library school. You really have to kind of dive deep into some of these different topics to really have an understanding of what all this takes. Subcontracts are an element that a lot of PIs like to include, and I think a lot of granting agencies like to see, especially in terms of interinstitutional collaboration, but they can be a real pain in the butt to facilitate. And it can take time to build those connections across campuses, figure out who the right person is to talk to, and so on. Overhead is another element, kind of the big monster under the water here of the iceberg. And it's another element that PIs really have not had to grapple with before. So, if you're not familiar, overhead is with federal grants is a percentage of money that comes in that goes straight to your central university finance units, operational units to support things like keeping the campus lights on, heating and cooling spaces and those types of things. And those percentages can get into the 50 and 60% range for federal grants. And so right off the top, half your money is going directly to the provost or the CFO, and you won't see any of it. So that can be kind of challenging to work with. And for many private or foundation funders who don't allow overhead, there is usually a mechanism on campus to either recover that overhead or some sort of indirect cost recovery or administrative fee that you have to pay into with some kind of separate funding source. So in our instance, we've actually started setting aside a reserve account to pay for these sorts of administrative fees, overhead recovery, those types of things, which is difficult to carve out when you have an already scarce or limited set of funding. I mentioned compliance before, but I'll mention it again because it is becoming increasingly complex. Most of us, I think, in library land are familiar with the IRB process. Some of us even partner with IRB offices to offer trainings and be involved in that part of the life cycle there. But workflows can vary across every institution. The image I have here on the slide is all of the different offices that we have to navigate through in order to get grants and other sponsored projects through. And each of them also has its own sort of processes, stages of approval, timelines to do those approvals, and systems that we use for grant submission. So this can be very difficult to navigate, and you do have to sort of work backwards from the due dates of your RFP and allow for plenty of time for each office to kind of do their thing. I'll skip over the mandates piece here since most of us are relatively aware of these at this point. But we're also required to report out our activities in terms of spend, our effort in order to remain in compliance with our federal and private funders. And for instance, we just completed the effort certification process here for the grants that we have actively running. And it was no small time commitment to track these faculty down, get them to respond in the way that they have to respond for the compliance piece in writing. And so again, it can be a very time consuming and labor intensive activity just for the reporting end of things. Next. All right. So we'll talk a little bit about connectedness, and I'm sure you're already starting to get a feel for how complex this is at CMU. But I won't go into all of these different offices and things that we have that worked through here, but it really is sort of an alphabet soup of research administration on ours and really any university or college campus. Everybody's going to have an office of sponsored programs of some sort. Everybody's going to have a group of folks who are focused on administration. And it's taken really several years for us not only to get a seat at the table for some of these groups, but to really learn the nuances in each and build relationships within each so that when we do need help, we've got a network to call on. And these groups, conversely, are also really interested to learn what the libraries are doing in the research support lifecycle. Many of them want to partner with us on things like ORCID IDs and research information management systems, open access funding, what we're offering there. So again, this is a time-consuming process and one that I will be delighted to delegate to our new sponsored projects accountant once they're on board. But it's something you really have to bake into your thinking and your processes around grant management. All right. So like Brian did, I'm going to round out this section with some key components to consider on the management side of things. And I'll go through these relatively quickly since we have, well, they kind of translate a lot of what I just covered in the basic actionable elements of who should be doing what. So instead of art and science, I'll cover kind of who and what on the more tactical end of this. So the first is really to create the infrastructure for this work. I absolutely recommend hiring a person, a dedicated staff line to help you with all of the administration processes and offices and things that you have to work with. If you can't afford one, consider partnering with another institution or another college on campus, rather, who maybe has a lower level of grant activity comparable to what the library is doing. We started out partnering with our Dietrich College of basically humanities and social sciences and shared their grant admin person for a couple of years. And then when she retired, we actually contracted with her to continue that work for us until we could hire this full-time person. So I think there are ways that you can get creative in order to create this infrastructure. But it involves things like documentation, workflows, backward timelines, closeouts. So lots of people, are really excited to get the grant, but they don't realize the length of effort and time it takes to actually close those out with reports and spending things out and managing, the $18 that's left in a certain line item. That takes time. So that infrastructure, having that in place before you get the grant is invaluable. Training, this one is pretty simple, self-explanatory. There's a huge learning curve to sponsored project management, and you'll need to invest a lot of time and energy both at the outset of your grant activity and in an ongoing way to keep up with all of the updates and nuances. Here at CMU, we have, the alphabet soup of offices that are engaged with this, but I have a meeting probably every other week with some office or other who have ongoing training and conversations about all of the issues here that we work with. So that ongoing training piece is also very critical to just maintaining your expertise in this area. So you don't have to spend time reskilling and retraining when you do happen to get a grant. Budget, of course, this one is another key piece because we're talking about transferring money here and there. And this is likely going to be a combination of people. But again, absolutely very important that current documentation is maintained with key metrics and parameters and things like fringe rate, overhead rates, cost of living assumptions, merit assumptions, graduate student salary rates. Grad students all over the place are starting to unionize, and that absolutely impacts the amount of time and effort they can spend on a project, what their pay rates are, and other things. So very important to have those things sort of close at hand, especially when you're down to the wire in terms of submitting those things, so you don't have to go back and correct those later once it's been submitted. One of the things I'm working on right now actually is translating a kind of a multi-page document that our prior grants person created as something that I can share with PIs and new staff as kind of like a reference document around the budgetary considerations here. Networking. All right. So similar to budget documentation, you really do have to build those relationships across campus with various individuals, offices along the entire life cycle, and be able to call on those folks when you have questions or something that urgently needs approval. And this seems like a no-brainer, I think, to most librarians. I think by and large, we're connectors, we're facilitators, we're collaborators, but this network is so important in an environment that is super fast-paced, very high stress, and which I think a lot of librarians just aren't used to dealing with. They don't teach us this stuff again in library school, and it can be challenging to kind of break in. And library grants overall, I think, are relatively small, but they're very meaningful to us when we do get them, and we don't want them to get lost in the shuffle with some of the larger colleges and projects that go through some of these offices. All right, so we're going to start to close down our session with a few thoughts on the administrative culture around sponsored funding. And I'll be the first to say that this is really still a work in progress for us, and likely will be, I think, for several years. Our work in the space was really necessitated by the increasing volume and amounts of funding that our librarians were going after, as well as the increasing complexity and structure of those grants with things like consultants and subawards and new software licenses that our legal department didn't like. And we have to figure out a more structured approach to sponsored funding, or we risk things like staff burnout and frustration on the part of PIs, bandwidth strain, all of those issues. We want to be less reactive to the short deadlines and more proactive, again, to minimize the organizational stress inherent in the process. And finally, we want to intentionally integrate sponsored funding into our annual financial forecasting so we can engage in the impactful projects, of course, but also to be good stewards of the allocated funds that we get each year, and hopefully use those for other fun projects, if we can get some of these grants on a regular and routine basis. Okay, so these, I think, were all mentioned throughout the talk, but I do just want to again pitch having a dedicated position. This is super important, and one that is absolutely critical if you are going to intentionally integrate grants into your financial infrastructure. The documentation workflows are absolutely, again, a critical piece related to that infrastructure, that creative pipeline for proposals that Brian talked about. You know, having a network of folks that not only can collaborate on the ideas, but also on getting the proposals through. Proposal templates and samples, you know, all of these things are just part of the overall infrastructure, I think, of a library that is actively grant seeking and actively, maybe proactively approaching this space. So I will stop there and turn back over to Brian, and we'll close out and answer some questions.
Sure. So one more list for you, for everyone here. And, you know, this is an important one, I think, too, is this, it's been very apparent, I think, from, you know, my own experiences, but also being able to watch other people across our library. There's this thing that happens when you kind of work on a grant, or it creates these opportunities for teamwork or team building or team bonding that's somehow different. You know, you're in this optimistic ideation phase, and it's stressful to do all the paperwork and stuff that Joelle just kind of mentioned, figuring out all the budgets and everything. But there's this liminal period, I think, where you're sort of dreaming a little bit. You know, there's this what's possible, there's this exciting energy, this creative spirit, and it's just a lot of fun. And so you're kind of venturing into some new, unique place together. And you know, we kind of think about that a lot from a management or supervisory or administrative perspective of how grants can sort of, you know, be sort of again, a bonding experience, not just a budgetary, you know, support, but something that's helping our culture as well. You know, it invites conversations around time management and leadership, or prioritization and professional development. You know, helps us understand our colleagues a little bit better, like what they're passionate about, what they need to grow and succeed, and those kind of aspects as well. And, you know, it just, you know, it gives us a chance to really sort of align and advance the strategic directions of, you know, our own interest, our research interest, or our service interest, but, you know, also, you know, where we're going as a library or as a local community or an institution, you know, what have you. So I know we've dumped a lot on everyone today, but you know, we've been deep into this for a few years, and we appreciate the opportunity to share it with the Calm community and share it with you. And we will open it up to questions. But if anyone else has, you know, things that they want to share, that they've, you know, some nugget of insight or you know, an experience that they found useful or whatnot, we invite you to grab the mic and do that. So thanks, everyone.
Well, first of all, let's thank both you and Joelle for an amazing presentation and an insightful presentation. And we can go ahead and take questions. And please be sure to type your question in the Q&A box, and we will get to as many of the questions as we can. So our very first question. Where did the panel go? Wait a minute. Okay, there it is. Our very first question is, how can you convince a centralized grants office that a library can be a serious player in institutional grants?
Maybe I'll start, Brian, and you can close it. So this, I think, has taken us several years. And again, we started like most do, with ad hoc small dollar grants. And we were really excited when we got them. They were great. But it really is small potatoes in comparison to what the College of Engineering is doing, what our science folks are doing through you know, NIH and other federal funders. But I think one of the ways that we did form partnerships with these groups is our dean is super focused on research, on research support, and a very vocal part of the campus administration community. He served on the search committee for our VPR. So he intentionally asked the provost for opportunities to engage at a very high level, kind of from the top down. But we also, from the bottom up, spent several years, again, I won't use the term infiltrating, but with integrating or engaging with some of these, the alphabet soup of research administration offices to have a seat at the table. We served on very tedious committees, writing bylaws, updating policy pages. So, just that ongoing work of research administration, having a seat at the table over many years and building those relationships has really given us, I think, a larger voice. And then we also have gotten a couple of very large, for libraries, grants that I think have, in the six figures, that have convinced them that we're players in this game.
Yeah, and I think I'll just kind of add, Joelle has talked a lot about the seats at the table, and that's a literal thing where, she serves on many different groups, but one of them is our the campus research administrators and sort of the operations level thing. I'm on the associate deans of research, so that group is there too. So we're part of those entities. I think for, the adjective that was used in that question was serious, player too. And I think what we've kind of seen for those serious level grants is being able to partner. Like when we did the robot work, we were working with our robotics institute. The things that we're doing with open source software is like we're working with our computer science college and so forth. So they're kind of like vouching for us. They're partners with us in certain ways. They're writing, letters of support for us, and they're interested in these outcomes too. So being able to leverage the relationships across campus to social proof for us as well. What else can we do? Yeah.
Thank you for that. Our next question is, could you go over again how to start this small and be successful?
That's the trick, that's the thing. I think again, it's, it's hard not knowing, like, send us an email. We're happy to kind of talk through that and jump on Zoom or something like that. But again, I think it's building that program of like, is there a theme that you really kind of are interested in that you have, talent or interest or capacity to build upon? And then it's kind of, from that being able to see, are we looking to host training sessions on this? Are we looking to do workshops? Are we looking to bring in a position to do something that's kind of, new? Is there collections that we have that are rare and at risk that we want to digitize? It's kind of figuring out like, what is the capacity that you have, and then kind of aligning that there, and then building sort of, momentum with that. I think it's, again, being able to look at who might fund these kind of things, or getting the lay of the land, so to speak, of what, depending on what you're looking for, what would that kind of take? And I think a little bit of like what Joelle was saying is like, before you write a proposal and submit it into the pipeline, talking to the people who are in the pipeline a little bit to kind of say like, hey, we're really interested in, especially if you do foundations. A lot of times foundations and grants, particularly too, like their university will often limit the number of, Joelle could probably say this better than I can, but they don't want like 100 people applying to Sloan or Mellon or something like that. They want to be very selective with that. So being able, when we were going through the foundation thing on the robot kind of project, there were a lot of like pre-meetings or even meetings before we could talk to the funder, that we had to go through our foundation relations and different kind of groups there. So that's a long ramble, Joelle. If you want to help with getting started, please.
I mean, we spent a lot of time talking about the paperwork and the infrastructure, but it really does start with a really great idea, and pairing that, as Brian talked about, with the mission of some of these funders. And I think maybe that combined with partnering with successful grant seekers in other colleges, again, as Brian mentioned, especially in the real grant heavy areas. So, the scientists, the engineers, they are constantly seeking grants. It's part of their RPT process in most cases that they do successfully manage this grant system and infrastructure. And so identifying those either through your liaisons or through, administrative connections, you have to start somewhere, and might as well start with somebody who knows what they're doing.
Thank you. So the next question is, as a library begins obtaining grant funding, does that become an expectation? Does it impact finding funds locally for projects?
So I can take this one, I think. I'm the person who who has to send our financial requests to the provost every year. I'd say this is a balance, I think. But it exists not just at CMU and not just in libraries. Deans who are successful at fundraising have more trouble requesting funds centrally in their allocation because they're a victim of their own success. I think grants can be a similar balance to strike. But I do think that the number of library grants out there, that just the amount of money that's out there to go after is small enough, and the work is, or the volume is low enough that when we do get them, at least our provost celebrates it. He helps us find ways around the administrative fees and so on. So I don't think that, at least for us, it impacts our allocation every year. So we might be outliers in that particular regard, but I don't know any provost who's gonna, hold it against a dean or a library that has found creative ways to earn more money.
Okay, and then the next question is also, and this is a follow-up to that previous question, is all the work worth it?
No, Joelle.
So I'll answer this from the paperwork administrative side. It is a lot of work. It is a ton of work. The staff who work for me that have to facilitate this on a contract level, and working with subcontractors and accounts payable and all of that. It's a lot, and I think they would say no to this question. I think yes, and probably from the perspective of being a campus player, not just in the grants area, but just in line with the other colleges. We don't want to be just seen as a service unit. We want to be seen as an academic unit, and going after these grants and being active in this space is one way that we can do that.
Yeah, that's what I scribbled too, is I think, a number of our faculty who have been involved in grants or have been PIs at grants, it opens up that conversations and relatability. And also there's again that social proof of like, they get invited to like, hey, would you be a co-PI on this, or would you join a project for us on this? So it kind of opens some doors for different types of engagement that maybe it's not us kind of running it, but we can join other people's grants as well and do different things in that regard. I think maybe a sub part of that question is like, does it become an expectation? If you start having a lot of success, does it become like expected that you're going to bring in grants? And our dean is not made that like, there's not an expectation. It's kind of nice if it does, and we tend to have a number of people who are excited about that. So I don't know if Joelle wants to riff on that, you can, but I think there's also this, again, what I kind of shared, there's this team building kind of thing that happens. It's this side effect that, again, it is a lot of work, and maybe the business side of it, depending on where you are in the phase, it might not feel worth it. But I think ultimately when you're sort of in the dream stage, and then also the completion stage of like feeling like we've done something that we couldn't have done otherwise, and we've had this benefit on people we might not have been able to work with or help or engage with in some other way. Like I don't know, it's still an experiment with us, but we've really tried to invest in the infrastructure, social and technical and financial, I guess we can kind of say bureaucratic, to kind of give our folks an opportunity. And we're seeing them interested in this, not because they have to, but there's just sort of a drive and an interest and maybe I don't know, some altruistic kind of thing there.
I would just add to that, there are also very special projects, I think, that if executed as designed and as planned in the dream stage and the vision stage, have the opportunity to really have a lot of social impact, campus impact, and even beyond. And I would use our OSPO work and grants as an example. We have several $100,000s in grants from from now various institutions and organizations to basically spin up our open source programs office. We're the first academic, I guess, collaborator or convener of OSPO offices, and our colleague Saeed Chowdhury is leading the charge here. And if this works, and I think it will, we can leverage this funding to start doing something that libraries have never done before, work that will truly be impactful in the open, in the open landscape. And so we have an opportunity here to really move the needle in terms of some of the areas that libraries feel most passionately and are most critical, I think, to what we do in higher ed.
Okay, and we have one more question. It's good you give a sense of scale and numbers. What is the small potato? What is small potatoes at a library versus a college with NIH?
Sure. So I will, again, just with the caveat here that CMU is a heavy research institution. We have tens of millions of dollars a year that go through various federal and private agencies. And so we are sort of an outlier just on the scale of research output that we do here. But I mean, we've got folks in, I'll use Mellon College of Science as an example, who are submitting multi-million-dollar grants routinely and getting them. And partially that's a benefit of the brand, so CMU is a well-known player in this space. Same with defense grants. We are a heavy player with DoD grants and those types of things. We spend a lot of money, a lot of federal money in various agencies, just in comparison to a library grant, which might be 150,000, 500,000, 650,000 is the biggest one I've facilitated so far. We've written one that's 1.2 million. So I don't know if that gives you a lot of context, but at least here, the library grants are tiny in comparison to what the engineers and the scientists are putting through.
Okay, that was the last question that we had, and we have 3 minutes left in the session, so right on time. So I will again say thank you to Brian and Joelle for answering all of the questions that the participants had. And again, kudos to you all for a great and informative presentation. We're such a pleasure to have you at COM with us this year for your presentation. For the attendees, now that we are moving to close the session out, I do want to point out that the evaluation survey is available for you to complete. I'm sure that Brian and Joelle would welcome your feedback. You can find the link to the evaluation form in Sketch. Is labeled feedback survey and is directly above the session description. So thank you all again for attending, and we hope you enjoy the presentation. And please, please, please fill out the evaluation forms, and we will see you at a session tomorrow. So you all have a good night.
Thanks, Shannon.
You're welcome. Thank you.